Welcome to the Compact Podcast. Today we'll discuss the shuttering of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau by Donald Trump and his DOGE team, and the Super Bowl, the Great American Festival. I'm joined by Ashley Frawley and Geoff Shullenberger, and I'm Matthew Schmitz. So the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is being closed down by the Trump administration. Variety of arguments have been made against its operation, of narrow technical and legal, and then broader arguments that it is stymieing free commerce by imposing unnecessary regulation. Ashley, I know you're following this. What have you made of the events in DC?
So one of the things that I've been wondering about is there are all these enormous sort of sweeping actions. Obviously, it's Trump is trying to be decisive, but at the same time, what's bundled into a lot of these. The CFPB, what's bundled into these regulations and that are just being dropped, and it's sort of being framed as, oh well, this is Warren's thing, so it must be bad. But one of the things that jumped out at me was that under this were regulations around preventing financial institutions from debanking customers if they held the wrong political views. And that had been one of the key things that right populists had sort of rode to power on. And it's been sort of buried underneath all of this sort of, slimmer government, more efficiency, all of this sort of thing. And I know, Geoff, when we were discussing this yesterday, you gave some interesting insight into why this happened. But I have found it kind of concerning because I wonder if what the left, or the so-called left, was doing, or under a kind of through a left framing, what they were doing was really capitalism's dirty work. Like a lot of the regulation, a lot of the DEI, I think the right really took it at face value. Oh, this is Marxism, this is cultural Marxism, and they underappreciated the degree to which it was just neoliberal capitalism, and doing whatever it does, but framing it through like empowerment of women and empowerment of people of color, because neoliberal capitalism has to be inclusive. No one is out of its orbit. Nobody escapes the eye of surveillance. And I suspect that they would like to keep on doing the same sorts of things against their own enemies. And we've seen they're just as happy to defund and to push political rivals out of institutions, much as I want to, gloat and revel in the Schadenfreude because I didn't like these people either. I think it's highly concerning that as soon as they come into power, they start doing the exact same thing. And so I wondered, was this intentional? Do they want to keep that in their arsenal? Debanking? Do they want to use financial institutions to discipline people just as much as the left did? And will they be able to do this without the cover of care, as the left had been doing? Because now what have you got? Like, the rationale was protecting people from, racism and loud horns or whatever, protecting them from the PTSD caused by truckers honking their horns, all sorts of stupid logics. I don't know, maybe we'll just slip back into the old form of justifying authoritarianism, which was to protect you from some kind of threat, maybe the communist threat, who knows. But I do think it's deeply concerning that the so-called left we're seeing, that had been in power for such a long time, had been in control of institutions and dominate institutions, whatever they were, had been communicating what they were doing through this kindly language. Now they're on the out. But what really is coming in? Is this really a win? Are we going to see more of the same dark forces, maybe even the same kinds of cancel culture, but in a right-wing, in a more right-wing framing, just more naked? I don't know.
So I saw this particular move coming from a while ago because it seemed there was a concerted push from various figures in the Silicon Valley world, including ones who weren't necessarily in the tech right, or more ambiguous figures like Mark Zuckerberg, who's sort of realigned himself in that direction somewhat, but not entirely. He didn't go kind of full bore MAGA, but he did, among other very prominent Silicon Valley people, in what seemed to be a coordinated push, criticized the CFPB on, I believe, Joe Rogan's podcast last year prior to the election. And several other figures went on, Rogan and other major podcasts, and repeatedly brought up the CFPB as this, diabolical force of kind of woke tyranny, and claimed, among other things, that it had been responsible for debanking conservatives, which is simply false. And the thing that's kind of interesting here is that as I think Ashley was saying, the previous head of the CFPB had in fact, issued rules attempting to prevent debanking and protect consumers from kind of ideological targeting of their access to banking services and financial services. And so, what's striking here is this attempt to kind of reframe the narrative of debanking, which, in some cases was a legitimate source of concern, that there was a kind of politicization of access to banking services that you saw, most strikingly around the Freedom Convoy in Canada, but seemingly some instances in the U.S. and elsewhere also. And basically, what you saw the Silicon Valley luminaries pushing was the idea that, basically various kind of crypto entrepreneurs had been refused services or accounts by, several major banks. And this is framed as and I don't know the details of these particular cases, but, and I assume, we're mostly relying on the word of the people who claim to have been debanked this way. So, the thing that's striking to me here is there's a kind of ambiguity already where, let's say you're running as we've seen many examples of just in the past few years, let's say you're trying to start a somewhat scammy crypto startup where you're, basically going to, pump and dump meme coins. Well, if you're refused an account by, the Bank of America, is that the same as having your accounts frozen because you, participated in a disapproved of political protest? To me, they seem like very different things, but these claims were conflating those two phenomena and treating them as the same thing, because I guess crypto is, in sort of pure vibes politics, crypto is right wing, and therefore, if you have a crypto startup and you don't get approved for a bank account, then you're being targeted for being right wing or something like that. So in any case, you saw this kind of narrative being constructed that the CFPB bizarrely was being accused of doing this debanking, which simply had no basis in fact. And the actual reality that they were attempting to limit debanking on political grounds was obscured. And so, I think what's going on here is that, basically there's a huge push to expand crypto and other kinds of, fintech services. Elon Musk, in one of the many conflicts of interests involved in all of this, wants to make X into an app along the model of China's WeChat, which is both a payments app and it's the everything app, right? He said he wants an everything app. He said that WeChat is his model. Interestingly, we're talking about China here, the land of social credit. WeChat, which combines your social media interactions and your payments, and is really, one of two or three ways that almost everything is paid for in China, if you've been there. the ironies here are so astonishing that, this man who's celebrated as a free speech champion is basically openly advocating for or openly aspiring to create a WeChat style app, right? Which is the linchpin of this kind of social credit integration where, this exact kind of debanking situation where, in theory, your statements online could affect your access directly to your money because they're literally through the same app. That this just a normal thing for a free speech champion to advocate for. A final thing I'll say here is there's an interesting piece in the American Prospect about how actually many in the banking and finance industry are unhappy about the as Musk called it, deletion of the CFPB, because having standard rules that are enforced across the board is often something that people want. And so I think what we're seeing here is when you have the laws are still on the books, right? The laws that the CFPB is supposed to enforce are still on the books. But if you don't have an agency that can actually be a neutral arbiter you can turn to, what happens? Well, what happens is basically people with access to power, like, say, Elon Musk, have the ability to advocate for their interests, and people who don't have access to power don't. And so I think what we're seeing is a kind of just, what this will amount to is an incredible corrupting influence that is directly tied to the aspirations of many of not just Musk, but Zuckerberg and others to integrate payments into their social apps. And that's, I think, what we're going to see. And then we'll combine that with crypto, with the kind of crypto bonanza. And we have basically the makings of the next big financial crisis, probably, with all of the kind of scammy stuff that is going to come out of this. And so, if I had to put my money on what the next 2008 will be, it will be based on the huge bubbles created by these corrupt arrangements made by Silicon Valley moguls to build up these sketchy payment apps without any oversight or regulation.
I would add to that just really quickly before the point gets lost, that I would say it wouldn't be caused by that. But the real question is, why are they so desperate to do such scammy, sketchy things in the first place? Why not put your money into something that's, you want to make America great again by what? Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, completely divorced from reality. That, the desperation to do that, to put money into completely non-productive investment, is already a sign that things are going terribly, terribly wrong. But it will be a wonderful scapegoat when everything comes crashing down.
Yeah, watching the kind of interaction between Musk and Trump, and observing Musk's interest in becoming kind of the banker for the nation, with his kind of social credit payment app, has made me wonder if we're seeing this bizarre moment where you have your populist style president, in the mold of Andrew Jackson, who really authentically is the sort of tribune of the common man and the vessel of their hopes in certain ways. So I'll make that strong statement for Trump. But then on the other hand, he seems to be in league with Nicholas Biddle, Andrew Jackson's great opponent, the head of the hated Bank of the United States, who Jackson saw as corrupting the nation and lawmakers. Many lawmakers were actually on retainer for the Bank of the United States, really bankrolled by Nicholas Biddle. And so, yeah, it's I guess maybe it's just a sign that everything is stupider and dumber the second time around. But and we'll see how much Musk really resembles Biddle or Trump Jackson. Maybe not so much in either case, but it has made me think that any description of Trump's Jacksonian character should have to account. The question should be asked: who is this Nicholas Biddle, and why is he backing Trump?
Well, yeah, I feel like there's more to be done here, because there was kind of an interesting history of sort of scammy banking organizations in the Jacksonian era. I remember this from actually reading a biography of Joseph Smith, founder of Mormonism, who at a certain point, he started a bank among his many enterprises. And it was this period of kind of deregulation of banking when you could just, like, anybody could just start a bank. And then at some point, there had been some huge scandals involving banks that just scammed all their customers, and so everybody turned against. There were riots against banks. People just charging in, and so at this point, I believe Smith rebranded his bank Anti-Banking Society. So he initially had, I think this was in Kirtland, Ohio, like the Kirtland community bank, but then it became the Kirtland Community Anti-Banking Society or something.
It's kind of like the Flannery O'Connor joke, Church of Christ without Christ.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. There's probably a longer history to be done about.
Yeah, it's also connected with the kind of non-denominational ethos in American religion. The sort of this is an anti-institutional institution. This is not a bank; it's an anti-banking society. So,
well, this sort of relates to the question of what DOGE is, right? Which I think can also be understood in these terms. It's a kind of anti-government part of government that isn't actually part of government, but a kind of it was created by being nestled within this what was it, digital services, what was it, something for digital services, but then it became DOGE services, so it's kind of this weird redundant like acronym within an acronym. And so there's this sort of inside outside anti-institutional institution kind of phenomenon taking place, which seems both novel and not. It's a fascinating and obviously there's plenty you can point to, as I said, in terms of conflicts of interests and so on. But I suppose what I'm interested in is like the ontological status of DOGE in relation to the state apparatus.
Well, one thing that you mentioned earlier that I thought was really interesting was there has been this kind of long-standing admiration for China between Trump and at least with WeChat with Musk. Now, a lot of the kind of capitalism with Chinese characteristics is an obsession with behavioral control, which is one of the things that I was kind of getting at when I was saying that a lot of the stuff that was passing as like left wing was really just about behavioral control. It was about trying to kind of ensure that, trying to reduce the problems that are allegedly created within the economy by people making poor choices. And this is like the overarching paradigm within a huge amount of governance, is this deep belief that you have like information weaknesses, et cetera, and this sort of proliferation of so-called market failures that basically blame what goes wrong in the economy on the limitations of human choice and intellect and whatever it might be, culture, all these things that become distortions. And then there's this increasing drive to kind of control behavior. And I wondered, maybe I missed this, but does Musk's admiration for WeChat slip over into the potential for the sort of surveillance and behavior management that it presents as well? Because, obviously, like Neuralink and all of that being as terrifying as it is, but I have seen like utterly woke people, in the past, heralding this as a wonderful thing because, it can prevent, it's, put these hats on truck drivers and you'll be able to reduce accidents and sleepiness and so on. And it's basically blaming truck drivers for things that go wrong and not the whole like supply chain that means that a truck driver finds himself driving for 38 hours or whatever it might be. It's just like, oh, that greedy truck driver. But anyways, so he's been very much complicit in all of this surveillance. And I think the anti-surveillance is a lot of what drove, again, as I say, the right into power. So do you know if it kind of carries over into that with WeChat? Because it would be very much in keeping, because this is my big question at the moment is I don't think that they're going to put an end to a lot of what's been happening. And I'm curious how they're going to carry it on. That's just my prejudice.
I'd say there's this kind of Ayn Randian vision that you have a kind of top tier of Ubermenschen who are actually going to kind of build and expand the human race into other parts of the galaxy and all these kinds of things, assuming they don't get too distracted by creating scammy crypto apps or whatever. But at the same time, and that's like another thing that I think is kind of interesting about this, the sort of bait and switch of, as I think you hinted at before, Ashley, of like, yeah, we're going to go to Mars and all these things. And then, well, actually the tech agenda is really just, we've got to unleash crypto. We've got to become the world leader in crypto. It's like, it's just a weird way of kind of creating a veneer of sort of futurism around this further expansion of the non-productive kind of speculative economy, which, is in fact parasitic upon the ability to, actually build things and, and like, anyway, so that's fascinating. But, but going back to your prior point, I think there is this like pretty, like, I find the techno-feudalism analysis as description, I've read critiques of it that have persuaded me that it's problematic and doesn't fully make sense. But I think understanding it as an aspiration of these people does make quite a lot of sense, right? Because they really do aspire to have a kind of, a small elite that, is the sort of these men of action who, build great things and achieve great things. And then everybody else is just this kind of dumb populace that needs to be managed and kept in its place and kind of entertained with bread and circuses. But yes, I mean, managed through everything apps that, kind of encompass every conceivable activity and just, provide a means of a kind of cybernetic universal control. And so I think this is pretty openly the aspiration of a lot of these people. And so again, I'm not sure techno-feudalism is actually a good description of what we have, but I think it's a good description of what a lot of these people seem to want.
Yeah, in that sense, it's a kind of masculinized version of what we had before, which was a kind of feminized globalism, where it was like the vision of the benevolent female leader at the top who like empowers the poorest to make the correct choices and decisions and so on. It's actually very, very similar. There's a paper in there somewhere, I imagine.
So who watched the Super Bowl? It was a pretty boring game if you did. I'm guessing, Ashley, you didn't. You're not so much of a sports ball fan.
I do not get it. And let me tell you, this has come back to bite me several times in my life, because if you can imagine, while I look like Morticia Addams, I was actually a cheerleader in high school. And even then I did not get it. Like there are some places that play football in Canada. And I remember we would just like, the play would stop and we'd be like, yay. And it'd be like somebody hurt. So yeah, I don't understand football. I don't get it. I find it interesting that there's this enormous like bonanza, capitalist bonanza. And there's actually something really wonderful about that. There's something I really like about it, but I can't feel it in my soul like I imagine you can.
Right. So I think, we can set aside the actual gameplay and we don't have to talk about the coverages or the, line play, but we can just talk about the cultural politics and we can all participate in that on equal terms. So this was kind of the post-woke Super Bowl in the perception of a lot of commentators. The NFL took its kind of post-2020 motto, end racism, out of the end zones. Obviously, Donald Trump appeared. First time a sitting president has attended a Super Bowl. And the halftime performance by Kendrick Lamar did not include any strong, explicit political display. After Colin Kaepernick started kneeling at one Super Bowl halftime show, you had Eminem also take a knee in solidarity. And that was kind of the peak of Super Bowl halftime political displays. But under the kind of capitalist supervision of Jay-Z and Rock Nation, who now runs the halftime show, these political displays have been shunted to the side. So, Jeff, what did you see? Do you Did you enjoy our new post woke Super Bowl?
I found it pretty bland overall. And yeah, I mean, there is something interesting about, uh, is there is post woke aesthetics uh, going to offer anything kind of striking or memorable in its mainstream version, right? We could point to kind of more kind of indie or countercultural manifestations of this stuff, and my overall impression was no. I mean, it was quite odd to me. I'm not particularly up on these sorts of things, but the main story coming out of the halftime show was the continuation of Kendrick Lamar's diss against Drake. So interesting little anti-Canadian element in there, I suppose. Although I'm not sure that's how it was widely framed or understood. But that there was this, and you also had Samuel L. Jackson appear on stage as Uncle Sam, which I suppose added a kind of patriotic element to it. But overall, and it did, the dancers were decked out in red, white, and blue. But in terms of political messages, I guess the main one was like Drake is a creep, Drake is a sleazebag who's into underage girls.
Yeah, so
And I want to interpret
why,
this as an anti-Canadian message that
yeah.
and the only thing that this resonates with is that there was actually an ad by the province of Ontario, kind of promoting Canada, promoting Ontario as a good place and good neighbor. That was broadcast during the show. So there is a little bit of the U.S. Canada enmity going on. But yeah, I did find it odd that the main focus of it was this kind of ongoing, escalating war between two rappers, and so it would, which seemed to distract from any kind of broader political narrative.
The Ontario ad had some language about promoting job growth here at home, implying stating that there's a shared home between Americans and Canadians. So definitely pushing against the American nationalism that Trump has been expressing against Canada. So the halftime show, I did think had a political importance and seemed to be the culmination of a bunch of trends that have been going on in our culture for quite a while. Uh, you know, Kendrick really structured the whole show around the anticipation of whether or not he would perform his big diss track directed against Drake, Not Like Us. And he did perform it, and that was the height of excitement in the show. And so millions of people watching on TV saw a stadium filled with thousands cheer along as Kendrick called Drake a pedophile. And seeing a stadium of people cheering on as someone is accused of being a pedophile and accused of that, while he's also accused of lacking authenticity, being insufficiently connected to the culture, to the community. This is part of Kendrick's brief against Drake. Drake is from Canada. Drake's mother is Jewish. He's this international man. He kind of crosses borders. He crosses racial lines, religious lines, and Kendrick, in his performance, he said at the beginning, it's not an exact quote, but it's very nearly so. He said something like, "It's about a cultural difference. They tried to rig the game, but you can't fake influence." And so, as he's maintained in his diss track, there's a cultural difference between him and Drake, and there's this kind of fakery or rigging going on in the favor of Drake and maybe of certain others. And unsurprisingly, in the course of this conflict between Kendrick and Drake, Drake actually brought suit against Kendrick and has charged him with defamation and specifically has charged him with ginning up anti-Semitic sentiment against Drake. Now, when you accuse your opponent in a rap battle of stirring up anti-Semitic sentiment, and when you sue him, you've automatically lost. It's fair to say Drake has lost this contest insofar as it's a display of manhood and braggadocio and all this. But you know, it's it's not really clear to me how lustily we should cheer on Kendrick's victory, even if you find Drake kind of annoying in certain ways, because when Kendrick appeared on this scene, he was taken as this brilliant rapper who also had a certain social and political significance. He was somehow speaking to uh, realities in our culture and inequalities that not everyone was willing to face full on. And so he's of a piece with this whole moment we've seen since the mid-teens, where both on the right and the left you have attempts to draw attention to certain forms of inequality, right, to certain social problems. This populist moment, which has taken on your more Bernie-ish form and your more Trumpish form, and Drake has poked at Kendrick over this. He's said, Drake has said in his own diss tracks things like, why are you always talking like you're trying to free the slaves? You're acting like an activist. Drake kind of hits Kendrick for being too politically conscious. Well, Kendrick's political consciousness, such as it is, has culminated in just calling someone a pedo, which is kind of what's happened just across our culture. So coming out, you had Occupy Wall Street in 2008, 2009, and then just turn the dial forward about 9 years, and you have things like Me Too, where men, many of them of a certain of ethnic and religious background, are being accused of abusing vulnerable young women. And then on the right, you have the kind of rise of QAnon and concerns about, Jeffrey Epstein and the pedos who are taking over our culture. And so there's this, and my, I don't know anything about Drake or the actual underlying matter of this beef, and I just generally do not care. I don't think it's operating on that level. I think it's instead operating on this other cultural level where we're denouncing people as pedos. The title of Kendrick's diss track, whatever, won the Grammy. Why am I talking about this so much, dear listener? Okay, look, it won the Grammy. It's #1 hit. It's a big cultural phenomenon, as much as anything can be in this more dispersed cultural context. The whole idea of it, he's not like us. It's about enmity. It's about difference, us versus them, and to me, that's really says a lot about the libido of our culture over the last 15 years, where it's not so much about sexual desire or throwing off restraints on sexuality or something. Maybe go back to Prince's kind of circa 2007 halftime show, which where he just performed in accordance with his career. It was sexy, it was rock and roll, it was this, it was that. I mean, this is much more about, are you authentic? Are you from the community? Are you one of us, or are you one of them? And if you're one of them, you're probably a pedo, or what does Kendrick say? You try to strike a chord, it's probably A minor. So that to me that to me really just summed up the politics of the last decade plus.
Yeah, I mean that's I think that's pretty spot on. I feel like I need to disagree more. I feel like that would make it a little hotter, but I I agree, but I
The
think,
beef is good for attention. Yeah.
yeah, I can't come up with a rap on the spot. But the fact that our politics culminate so easily in this kind of like, you're a pedo versus like it's like he's a bit rapey, that's out, and he's a bit of a pedo, that's in now. Um, but I feel like this is kind of the where what's happened to our political discourse. We've lost the ability to talk about problems in any other way except through this kind of melodrama. And you mentioned Occupy, and that was sort of the big issue. It was like, they couldn't figure out who that they wanted to point the blame at somebody, right? Like, oh, corporate greed. But the more everywhere you stop to point your finger, you're like, it's just a bunch of people doing their job. And well, what are you going to do with that? There was no evil person, with their evil puppet master, making things go wrong. It was like very, very difficult to understand. And unfortunately, the problems it faces, that's what they are. They're hard to understand. But the media cycle being what it is, and having to talk to a large audience, you're not going to get anywhere with this, fumbly analysis, pointy headed person being like, well, you see, it's systems, not people. And so we get used to talking about like victims and villains and bad guys. And yeah, of course, it's like we move from Me Too to, pedophiles in basements somewhere. And it's a bit sad because I like big public spectacles. I love the Olympics. I love these I love traditions. I love moments where people sort of come together, and it's very difficult to not turn these into a town hall because you've got millions and millions and millions of people, just absolute arrested attention, and the opportunity is there, and so you're going to do what you want with it. And I feel like having a beef with another rapper in the grand scheme of things is probably the best thing to do with a Super Bowl performance, as opposed to, trying to, make some political statement that inevitably receives a ton of backlash in the days that follow. But a part of me just wishes, like, most people just want to be left alone when they come home at night, they lay their head down and they want to, have a beer and some chips or whatever. And we just can't seem to do that without it being another iteration of, like, it seems to me, sort of grievance culture, of this kind of like, well, what you can't just point your finger at somebody. It's got to be part of something bigger. You're like part of some pedophile network. You're like, it's not that this person is a bit creepy. It's about rape culture. And it's just where they're doing this again and again and again. And on these big public stages, it happens again. You can't just have a beef. It's got to be part of, a broader kind of cultural, it's got a nod to a kind of cultural critique of conspiracies and all this sort of thing. Makes me sad for our culture, but on the other hand, I feel like most people are also tired of it. You can sense that feeling of just being tired of the culture war among a lot of people.
Yeah, I'm not sure they are. Yeah, and they're tired of the culture war in its current forms, but they do. Yeah, we're always finding new reasons for enmity. And one thing that's funny, a little funny about the Kendrick Drake beef is that it seems that it's easier to call someone a pedophile than to use some more traditional slurs in rap. So it's funny, you kind of move on. One slur becomes unacceptable, and so you just move on to one that is just really really ups the rhetorical ante.
Whether people are tired of the culture war, it's funny because it depends on who I'm talking to, because sometimes I'm like, yeah, the culture war is over, the culture war is dead. And then you talk to someone else and like, yeah, the culture war that's the most important war. We got to fight and we got to win, kind of thing. And it's so bizarre. I feel like sometimes I feel exhausted with it. And at other times I think it has been an expression of sort of deeper rumblings in our culture, sort of a deeper kind of desire for freedom and to clamp down on it. And the people who have been coming out on top are the ones who want us to be able to say what we say, whatever we want to say, and who want us to be able to live our lives with minimal surveillance. But when it all comes down to it, and people are actually in a position of power and they find themselves at the reins, it seems like that all gets abandoned. But I do think the underlying thrust is between people who trust humanity and trust themselves, or at least trust themselves, and those who don't. And I don't know. I think that's kind of maybe the deeper kind of problem or crisis in society that culture war was giving voice to. And to the extent that we think that we've won. I mean, I did feel like, well, woke is out. We've won for like a day or two. And then I started to become more pessimistic and worried as time went on.
Taylor Swift was also booed
No.
on the big screen. Well, yeah, right. What's her song? You're the cheerleader. So yeah, you're a Taylor Swift fan, even though you were the cheerleader. But I think Taylor Swift, her song is about not being the cheerleader. So you were one of the cool girls Taylor Swift sadly sang about.
Well, younger me would have hated Taylor Swift because although I was a cheerleader and blonde, I did love my punk rock. So as I become more honest as I get older, I'll love Taylor Swift. I don't care. She's a girl's girl. She's got your back. I like that vibe.
Yeah, she was booed when she was shown on the big screen in the stadium, and Trump commented on this later and said MAGA is very unforgiving, suggesting that the boos resulted from Taylor's endorsement of his opponent,
right? Of course,
Kamala Harris. It may just have had something to do with her association with the Chiefs, one of the teams. But I don't know, Jeff. What do you got on the Trump Taylor beef? Not as significant or interesting as the Kendrick Drake beef, but real, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I'll just I'll say that we were scheming that if the Chiefs had won and Travis Taylor proposal had followed, we would publish something on this being the sort of pivotal moment of the American 21st century. And we would use it to attempt to meme into existence a new baby boom. And so
yes, the reconciliation of the childless cat ladies and of the angry incels. They
exactly.
can come together and build an American future. Together.
So unfortunately, we lost that opportunity, and I was kind of sad about that. I thought Taylor looked a bit sad and distraught up there. So I don't know. I'm a little worried. I feel like I feel like something has to happen to reintegrate Taylor into the new cultural moment, and this would have been the opportunity for that. And now I'm not sure what's going to happen.
We wanted a new birth of normality and kind of Instagram fueled baby boom, and all we got was a stadium shouting along denunciations of pedophiles.
We were so close. We could have had our cishet moment. The triumph.
Oh, well. So with that, thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Ashley. We'll have more on the Super Bowl next year. Until then, go to compactmag.com/subscribe.